more and more people are realizing you just can't get there by doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And the funny thing about all of this is when you get politicians, provincial politicians, new provincial politicians in government, they think they're smarter than the former politicians and that they can do something that the former politicians couldn't do. And it just goes on and on and on. And finally, you get to a point where you get some people that have a backbone, either from the public or in government, that are willing to stand up to the status quo and demand something different.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Critical Compass. I'm Mike, and this is my co-host, James, and we are very happy to be joined today by Dr. Dennis Modry. He is the chair of the board of directors of the Alberta Prosperity Society. He is a cardiothoracic surgeon, very credentialed, very awarded surgeon. Started the Alberta's first, I believe, heart and lung transplantation program. He's a native of Camrose, the Rose City, and he's with us today to talk about Alberta independence and all its various forms. So thank you, sir, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Mike and James, for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Right on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I'm just wondering, just a big question to start us off. If you're going to give Canada as a country a bill of health, how is it doing it right now?
Well, I think I can say with a great deal of confidence that we're not doing very well. As you know, our debt has doubled in the last 10 years as a result of many federal policies and taxation that have restricted or inhibited investment into the country, not just into Alberta, but certainly if you take Canada from another perspective, when you look at economic growth of all industrialized countries in the world, we're showing dead last. So I think from a health perspective, economically, we're in big trouble. On top of that, I mean, if you really want to get to the health issue on the other side of the coin, physical, personal health, we have a serious problem with our health system, and it's manifest in the wait times that people have to endure in order to access care of many sorts, not just surgical care, but even just to see a family physician, etc. But this all has to do with, if you look at the individual health of individuals, you have to look at what's driving the problem. We live in a system in which, we require somebody else to make decisions about our health. So you could ask a question this way, or look at it this way from a health point of view. Where does an individual's responsibility for his or her health and society's responsibility for that person's health begin? And we live in a society where we want someone else to look after us and someone else to pay for it. So we've lost responsibility and accountability for our health. And this is one of the major reasons why we have a serious health problem, which is why, take the provincial government in Alberta, 1/3 of the budget goes to healthcare, which is crazy, so, and yet we have long waiting lists, so, but in any case, the state of the union, as it were, if you're asking me the question about health, I've given you two in relation to how unhealthy we are economically and physically. We could get into the legal end of things too, our judicial system as well, which is another area of unhealth.
So there's a few comorbidities.
Yeah, there are
right
a
now
number
in
of
Canada.
comorbidities in Canada. Yeah, exactly.
So, Dr. Modry, you've been involved in the idea of Alberta gaining more independence from Ottawa for many decades now. What, in your time being involved with this general topic, what have you? I'm curious about what you've seen in the general public view of you and people like you who are advocating for things like this. Has the public's perception of it changed over the decades?
Well, I think what happens, or what has happened, as I look back over Alberta and Saskatchewan's history over 120 years, we've seen the um, concept of Alberta sovereignty or Alberta independence wax and wane depending on how much we feel subjugated, dominated, or exploited by the federal government. Um, and we've made some gains and we've had many losses over the years. And I think what we're seeing now is a final uh, recognition by many people in the public that something just isn't right, and they recognize that the system hasn't been able to be repaired. The problems within the system haven't been able to be prepared through negotiations. People are starting to recognize that the um, federal government really operates for the benefit of the East and not so much for the West, except that the East wants to continue to exploit us. And I think, as a result of individuals and families feeling the economic pinch, um, they're not happy about this. And this is something that has occurred internationally around the world. This is why societies break up, and countries break up, uh, primarily because of economics, but not just economics, it's cultural as well. And so, I think one of the big things that has really occurred, and we don't talk about it very much, but you go back to 1960, for example, and 58% of people aged 30 or younger were able to purchase a house. Um, and Now it's 12%. So, so there's an example right there. And we're seeing a hollowing out of the middle class as a result of the necessity of couples not having kids because they both have to work, or if they have to have, or if they do have kids, then who's looking after them? It's becoming the state. So the state's taking more and more control away from families as well, and this is creating angst and I mean there are so many issues that can be addressed, that qualify for Albertans being frustrated with the federal, provincial governance structure and are looking for something different. They're looking for more freedom and more prosperity. And how do they get there? And, to succinctly answer your question, more and more people are realizing you just can't get there by doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And the funny thing about all of this is when you get politicians, provincial politicians, new provincial politicians in government, they think they're smarter than the former politicians and that they can do something that the former politicians couldn't do. But the reality is they're just as naive as the, former politicians. And it just goes on and on and on. And finally, you get to a point where you get some people that have a backbone, um, either from the public or in government, that are willing to stand up to the status quo and demand something different. And we're in that circumstance now where we have many people in the public that are willing to stand up for individual freedoms and rights and long for prosperity and are planning for it in a different model. And you're seeing, certain politicians standing up alongside of those individuals, um, although they have to be careful politically where they stand. But nevertheless, they too are frustrated with Alberta's relationship with the federal government. And I dare say as well that these feelings are not unique to Alberta. These feelings exist elsewhere, particularly in Saskatchewan and central and northern BC, and certainly in Quebec. And you've seen the rise of the Parti Québécois in the polls I mean, they're poised later this year, to win a significant, uh, to win the election by a significant plurality, I would think, based on the polling, anyhow. So, many regions of the country are unhappy with the federal provincial governance structure, but it can't change. It can't change unless something dramatic happens, and something dramatic will happen, and we're making it happen.
Yes, sir, you are. And sorry, James, I'm going to go back to back questions because I'm going to forget if I don't ask. Um, the comment that you made, Dr. Modry, about politicians needing to be careful, so to speak, that leads me to wonder your opinion. We've asked a few guests this, who kind of know her, but your read on Danielle Smith. Do you get the feeling that she's opinion seems to be a little bit split on this, but do you get the feeling that she would be a help or an impediment to an independent Alberta should the referendum go the independence way?
Well, let's put it this way. If the petition, once the petition is completed and the provincial government now is obligated to hold the referendum, I think, she will be looking at what the polling looks like prior to the referendum. She's going to be looking at that. I rather think that she's going to take a very centrist position um, on what she wants to see happen. She said publicly, of course, she wants Alberta to remain in Canada, but with far more control of its wealth and affairs. Um, when you ask her the question, well, how do you feel about the possibility of becoming the president or the prime minister of the sovereign country of Alberta? She giggles and doesn't really answer that question. So
Smart.
it's hard to really peg, where she's at. But let's look at something factual, okay? She's made 9 demands of Mr. Carney, all in relation to oil and gas, except for single-use plastics. She's also made 8 constitutional requests through the Alberta Next panel. Well, let's see what Mr. Carney does. She's given him 6 months. She said publicly, we'll give him 6 months. And otherwise, it's a threat to national unity. Those are her words. It's a threat. It would be a threat to national unity. She has stated publicly that she's meeting with Mr. Carney, and I don't know if it was yesterday or today, that she's getting a tremendous amount of information from the Alberta Next panel in support of Alberta sovereignty. So she's using this, I think, as leverage as well to speak with Mr. Carney that if you don't do these things, there's very likely going to be a referendum in support of Alberta becoming a sovereign country. And, I don't know what the outcome of the most recent discussion with Mr. Carney is, but let's look at something that we all know. She's very bright, she's very articulate, and she's excellent at getting a message across. So she would be a tremendous asset to the Alberta sovereignty movement if she acknowledged all of the potential benefits to the public of Alberta becoming a sovereign country and helped to assuage any of the concerns that are out there. Now, she has demonstrated tremendously strong rhetoric publicly in terms of dealing with the federal encroachment on provincial constitutional authority. She's been very strong on that, which is why she came out with those 9 demands and the 8 requests through the Alberta Next panel. But how has she actually dealt with these things? She's launched, or her government has launched some 16 or 18 lawsuits against the federal government on issues pertaining to oil and gas, on issues pertaining to property rights, on issues pertaining to censorship, um, and issues pertaining to agriculture. So, is this really the way we're going to solve problems with the federal government? It doesn't work because we see the way in which the Supreme Court responds. They tend to support um, any of these federal provincial litigations in favor of the East if the East will at all be compromised as a result of Alberta getting control of its own affairs. But on top of that, what concerns me as well is she had an opportunity right from the get-go when she became premier to take control of 5 things: provincial policing, immigration, employment insurance, provincial tax collection, and did I say immigration? Immigration as well. So those 5 areas didn't require a referendum. They only required the courage to say to Ottawa, "We're taking control of these 5 areas." And she could have done that. Now it looks like she wants to put them on a ballot, a referendum ballot, to see how people respond. But real leadership, is doing the right thing for the people of Alberta. And doing the right thing for the people of Alberta would have been to take control of those 5 areas, because at least it would have been a start to gaining control of our own affairs, and rather than having the federal government, um, look after them for us. We're old enough now um, to be able to. In other words, we've grown up. Alberta's grown up. It can look after its own affairs. It doesn't need the federal government interfering anymore.
Oh man.
Yeah. So it seems like underpinning all this. So with Alberta's relationship with the federal government, we're still within a Canada that is underpinned by, you've got a fiat currency, you've got a welfare state, you've got high immigration, and these interplay in a way that essentially makes everything more difficult underneath it. So if we need to support the services that we have, if we need to create new debt and devalue the currency, so like devalue the results of the labor of pretty much every individual, you need to print more and more and more, or import more and more cheap labor to try to support um, that welfare backbone. And so with immigration both being, it falls under the jurisdiction of both federal and provincial. That is something that could have been addressed a little bit more, like more strict just on the provincial level, but we're still existing within that federal system. Like provinces are not subordinate to the federal government, but we're in a confederation where the federal government's very much still acting as a parent to the provinces. And I think we've seen Daniel Smith push back on that, help educate more about like what is actually under the provincial control. So there's some good things happening that way, but it seems like Alberta independence gives a good opportunity to address this fundamental layer, because without addressing the money, without addressing kind of these basic laws of supply and demand, when it comes to people, housing, what we need to provide for services and what we're able to provide, um, without addressing that layer, I don't know if Canada's going to last. So it feels like Alberta is in a unique position to restructure some of these things. It's almost like this is our best shot to actually make some change.
Yeah, I agree. It is our best shot, and Alberta becoming a sovereign country, there's absolutely no question that there's international recognition for what's happening in Alberta right now. This is important to understand because elsewhere in Canada, and I've touched on this already, but also internationally in Western civilization, people are looking at what's happening in Alberta. They see Alberta as a beacon of hope, a beacon of light, a beacon of the pathway to get out from under the globalist crush that's limiting our freedoms and our prosperities. And as a result of that, if you take Canada, Alberta becoming a sovereign country, very likely Saskatchewan's going to come along with us. Other regions may do the same thing. But what it forces then is everybody is going to have to say to themselves, well, what next? What do we do now? Okay. And I mean, in a very simple way, think about this as revenue and expenditure. Okay. The revenue side is just about shot. Okay. Other than continuing to tax people even more and more. The expenditure side is never addressed. It's never been addressed. And as you know, Mr. Trudeau has nearly doubled the bureaucracy during his 10 years, along with doubling the debt. So let's look at, what will happen to the rest of Canada. Well, the Canadian dollar will drop in value, for one thing. The AAA bond rating that Canada has now, I think it still has a AAA bond rating, but it might be AAB. I'm not sure. That's probably going to drop as well. And it's going to force the federal government and whatever components in Canada that are still involved with the federal government to dramatically reduce their expenditures. And they're going to have to get their house in order as well. Because a lot of what we're talking about is getting our own house in order. So we'll get our house in order here in Alberta, by becoming a sovereign country. It will force the rest of Canada to do the same thing. And it will create opportunities rather than, the fear-mongering that occurs as a result of, people who want to sustain the status quo. It will create tremendous new opportunities for people because, in general, a lot of people have inner individualism to themselves. They need to make something happen. They need to be able to make a living. So they'll figure it out. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to not just save Alberta and Saskatchewan, but to save the rest of the country from the globalist World Economic Forum agenda that wants to control every aspect of our life. And, we've seen a tremendous pushback already occur in the United States with the control of immigration. Quebec has been ahead of us, ahead of Alberta and other regions in the country, because they do control immigration in Quebec, So, and of course, we're not against immigration, but we are against uncontrolled immigration. And, the temporary worker program has to be addressed, and those temporary work visas have to be addressed. There are 5 million of them, apparently, where the visas are expiring. What's going to happen to these individuals? Well, I guess as you are aware, there is the possibility that they can apply for refugee status, which may give them, as a family, a lot of money, much more than people get in their pensions or vets get, et cetera. And so I think, the opportunities that we have to get out from under economic oppression. I look at it this way. I think of sovereignty as not just in its simplistic form of self-governance, but really freedom from external influence, freedom from persecution. And what we've been experiencing over the years is persecution in many ways. It's political, economic, cultural, religious, regulatory persecution. And we want out from under that. We want more control of our life and our affairs for the benefit of ourselves and our families. It's really kind of that simple. But it's simple to say. It's a little harder to get there because so many people don't even realize how they are being subjugated, dominated, and exploited, and how their self-determination is being inhibited under the weight of the federal government regulatory environment that we are forced to live under. And at least Daniel Smith has, and the UCP seems to have recognized and are finally standing up for it. But how far will they go is a matter to be seen. And we're trying to give them the opportunity, the provincial government, it doesn't matter which provincial government, we in the Alberta Prosperity Project are trying to give them the opportunity to get ahead of this movement. And in some ways they are, and in other ways they're not. And so it's hard to know which way the premier is going to go eventually. I can tell you this, though. If conventional polling by Angus Reid and some of these others were showing 52, 55% polling in favor of Alberta sovereignty right now, she'd be all over that. The UCP government would be all over that. But right now, that polling is more in the order of 40 to 45%. Um, but I think the polling is inaccurate anyhow for a number of different reasons. But anyhow, let me answer your questions before I drone on.
Well, it's funny because something you said just brought up something that we talked about on a recent episode where you mentioned how people like us and people involved heavily in this discussion do sort of have this inherent kind of push towards wanting to self-determine and wanting more control over various aspects of our lives that we're not allowed to have under a what many view to be an overreaching, oppressive federal governance structure. Having James and I went to, in the same week, a few weeks ago, we went to the APP event in North Edmonton there, and then we went to the Alberta Next panel a couple days later at on the west side of the city, and the contrast between those two groups of people was stark. There were a lot of people at the Alberta Next panel who were it did seem to be independence minded, but what we did notice is that the people who were so eager to be in lines and to shout their points, and I mean, you've probably seen or been to these panels, there seems to be a type of person who actually views the idea of being given more control over various aspects of their life and their the power they can exert over their governance. They view that as a threat, actually, and they view that as something being taken away from them rather than something given to them. For that type of person, just as a quick example, in the Alberta Next panel question about should we consider an Alberta pension plan if it can be constructed in such a way to give the same as or better benefits to its members, and people would shout no, and they would they'd go up to the mic and they weren't even listening to the question. It's just the notion of taking something out of a liberal government's hands and putting it into a conservative government's hands is very threatening to them, regardless of whatever benefits might be gained through it. Do you have any idea of how do you start with a person like that?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we all have to recognize that people will sometimes become so ideologically propagandized that there's nothing that's going to change their mind. I mean, if you take real true Marxists or communists, they believe in central government, central control of the means of production and distribution, and they're after equity and equality. But it's not equality of effort, it's equality of outcome that they're after. And so anything that's a threat to the collective, as it were, such as individuals, rising up, is a threat to their thinking. A lot of these people rely on handouts. I mean, they want something for nothing. They truly do believe that if you spend 10 years after high school learning multiple trades or higher education to become some sort of professional or so, that your compensation for all of that time and effort and education um, should be compensated at the same rate as someone who doesn't even graduate from high school. So it's very difficult to be able to engage with people like that. Fortunately, there's a lot of people that do understand that effort should be rewarded, um, and they may have, very good altruistic reasons for having a socialist sort of mentality, a liberal socialist mentality. They want to help other people. They don't want anybody to be impoverished or homeless. Um, um, and that's a good thing. But what is the best way to get there for everybody?
Yeah.
And this then becomes, well, a discussion of, well, what are the models of government that will work best in this fashion? And if I were to describe it from a democracy perspective, you'll remember what Churchill once said. He said, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else."
Yeah.
But if you go back to Alexander Tytler, the Scottish nobleman, he and this is in the 1800s. He once said, "Democracy cannot survive in its current form, because once the public understands that it can vote itself largesse from the public treasury, it will always vote for the government that provides the most."
Mm.
Okay?
Mm.
But then, and that kind of helps to explain where we are right now. And he was right, and so people that want more and more from government with less and less effort tend to vote socialist, vote for the NDP, for example. But a very important point about why democracy fails is Section 1 of the Constitution. So, as you know, Section 1 gives the government the right to abridge your individual freedoms and rights, ostensibly for the benefit of the public at large. But here's the point, and we saw this in action with COVID, right? And Trudeau even acknowledged that he's going to breach Section 1 of the Constitution. I'll make this very clear. This is not my statement, but this is a statement from a very bright, now deceased businessman who I knew very well. He said, if you look after individual rights, you will look after societal rights, but the reverse does not occur. Okay? So if you want to really fix democracy, get rid of Section 1 of the Constitution. Okay? And then you've got individual rights respected, because otherwise you have the tyranny of the majority over the minority in a democracy. Okay? But if you look after individual rights, and those individual rights are codified, meaning that you can't go out and kill somebody, you can't rob people, you can't rape people, you can't do bad things. In other words, okay. Otherwise, the law steps in. Okay, that is where your rights are abridged. Like my fist coming at your nose has to stop before it hits your nose, right? Otherwise, I've interfered with your rights. Okay, my right to hit you is interfered by the law, and so it shouldn't happen. So in any case, that's a little, it's my thinking about democracy. And as a sovereign Alberta, we are working on a constitution that brings into line individual freedoms and rights. Interim constitution that we're proposing is based on the U.S. Constitution, but there's a number of amendments to the U.S. Constitution, so that means, they had to fix some things along the way. What we're proposing is a constitution that's loosely based on the U.S. Constitution, but it has even more checks and balances, and it has more public input through sort of along the Swiss line, where certain things that the government can't do, for example, is to impose something that the public might not want, and in order to discern whether the public wants it, you have to hold a referendum on it. And so that's one way to deal with these sorts of things. And so I think you'll be really excited to see what we're proposing in the new constitution, which is, like I say, it's been run through constitutional lawyers and business people and professionals, et cetera, et cetera. And it hasn't been released yet because we're still tweaking it. But we expect that it'll be released by the end of September. And this would be the basis for a full constitutional conference that would take place after Alberta declares its sovereignty, immediately following a successful referendum.
Yeah, so a lot of those that are skeptical of independence on the left, more pragmatic in the sense of like, well, they don't trust the UCP. If they are worried about a government overstepping their bounds and reaching into people's lives and acting in a way that is corrupt, then technically wouldn't they want more checks and balances?
Exactly.
Like a limited government is limited in its ability to become corrupt or to interfere with people's lives. So this is a unique opportunity to weave in a better foundation through a robust constitution.
Well, exactly. And here's just one example from the Constitution, the proposed Constitution. You have the people above a constitution, and then you have the various branches. But we have a new branch, and which is above all of them, and that is a branch that oversees the executive branch, the judiciary, the Senate, and its sole mandate is to ensure that each branch of government does not deviate at all from the Constitution. Okay, so there can't be anything, and that's its sole responsibility. And there are 4 arms that look after that oversee those 4 branches of government. Then, on top of that, from an economic point of view, what we're proposing as well is that each department that operates, whether it's be education or healthcare or military, every 3 months there's an audit released to the public. So when you are audited every 3 months, you have very little opportunity to divest funds in a way in which they shouldn't be divested. You see what I'm saying? So checks and balances, right? And then for any new spending bills or something that may be substantive, you'd have to have a referendum on that, or a plebiscite, either or. Referendums are binding, plebiscites are not necessarily binding, so referendum would be preferable. So you see what I'm saying here is that for the individual who's concerned about corruption in government, what we've attempted to do is virtually eliminate it in this fashion. And I think it should be picked up by and supported, by the Alberta electorate, from the Constitutional Conference. Now, it doesn't mean to say, once we release the interim constitution for the public, just like the Value of Freedom document, open for public discussion. So we expect there are going to be, constitutional lawyers on one side of the equation, and constitutional lawyers on the other side of the equation, arguing about various points, and we're going to, it's just the way it is, but this is what we want. We want public discussion, and we're not saying that everything is going to be absolutely perfect. We're just like the Value of Freedom document has been open for public discussion. We're making some tweaks to that before its second version is released. So by the same token, the same thing will happen with our proposed interim constitution. And these sorts of things will help the public understand what the potential is for a sovereign country, and just how much more freedom and potential prosperity there is. There was an interesting review by Martin Armstrong from Armstrong Economics, who predicts various things around the world using economic analysis and understanding exactly what goes on. So these are he doesn't base his results on a theory. He actually analyzes what's going on and then figures out, well, why did this happen? How did this happen? Um, and one of the interesting things that he's come up with, I've sort of forgotten my train of thought on this, but one of them is that beginning with the end in sight here right now, he's predicted that Alberta will become a sovereign country. And I just saw that just the other day. I thought it was pretty interesting, but it was something about economics that that he said that I thought was really quite interesting. But it'll come to me. I can't remember what it was. I'm getting
Well,
older.
we
Actually,
can
no, I just had a Joe Biden moment. That's all.
we can circle back to that. That's no
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear, actually, in your point about what a new Alberta Constitution could look like, because we've talked about this on the show before. Specifically, this became very clear, as you recall, through COVID, that people tend to be in favor of governments overstepping their authority when that government is in agreement with their personal beliefs, but then they don't think about the flip side of that coin, where, well, if my government ever gets voted out and replaced with somebody else, maybe I wouldn't want them to be in possession of the same powers that I'm happy to give to this government. So what you say is really encouraging, because we lean pretty libertarian in this respect, where in order to avoid any of that in the future, let's just limit severely the ability of any government to overstep its authority.
Exactly. Now, I did remember what Martin Armstrong did say, and it kind of adds to this point here, is that one of the most convincing arguments in favor of Alberta sovereignty is the ability to eliminate personal income tax. And he's made that point, that that's all Alberta needs to do. Eliminate personal income tax, have a 15% corporate income tax that's constitutionally constitutionalized at 15%. It never can be changed. That's the maximum. It can never go. It's 23% right now, but 15%, say. And that will assure a win. Okay, so before I saw this article by Martin Armstrong, we have this in our Value of Freedom document already, the elimination of personal income tax, and I think if you have, and you guys know this, but if you have more money to purchase the goods and services that you want, that's beneficial for you as an individual, but it's also beneficial for your family. You can travel more, you can purchase better items, you can plan for your future, retirement, that sort of thing better, because you're now completely out from under all federal income tax, all federal regulation, and now you don't even pay provincial income tax. What can be better than that, from an economic point of view for the individual? And you'll remember from the APP event that you attended, you take an average Albertan making $100,000 a year, paying what we know is $48,000 a year in taxes. That's all taxes in. Well, now all of a sudden you're out from under that completely, okay, and you've got there's a corporate tax, but you don't pay the corporate tax at all. And you might just have a property tax left, but over time we might be able to get rid of property tax as well. So these are the outcome is just so astronomically brilliant for Albertans that if you don't like that, if you don't like having more money and the ability to purchase goods that are even less costly, then by all means you have every right to move to a region where you can pay more taxes and pay more money and get less quality product and less service. And there it is. Just move there and be happy in your socialism.
It's so funny you say that, because one comment that really stuck out to us, we talked about it after from the Alberta Next panel, was, and this is pretty close to word for word, Dr. Modry. There was a woman at the mic who said, "I'm okay paying more taxes if it means that a firefighter in New Brunswick is better able to do their job." And I just couldn't, I was so struck by that. I was like, that, I mean, sort of what you said earlier, I understand the general idea of what, yeah, no one is in favor of people dying in fires. We want
No.
fire departments to be funded, but the idea that it should somehow be Alberta's responsibility to fund New Brunswick's fire department is just so far away from how my head works personally that I can't quite rationalize. I don't know, maybe I'm asking you the same question twice, but like, what do we do about people like this, doctor? Please.
Yeah, I mean it's really kind of it's thinking that isn't part of the mainstream, I'll put it that way. I mean, is she also okay, or would she also be okay because Trudeau has spent $11 billion financing gender studies in other countries around the world? Is she okay with that as well?
Probably. I'd say probably, yeah.
So,
You'd have to stress test some of these ideas of like, well, like how much has been wasted, and if she, before like adding new taxes, or like, are you really happy with your taxes? You're complaining about the cost of living. You're complaining about like everything's so expensive, or you don't have enough money for these bills, or food's getting really tough to actually afford the quality groceries that you want. And you're okay with your taxes going up, and you're okay with sending money overseas. Like, which one is it? Like, can you have all these things? At some point, you're gonna run into basic physical laws, and you'll have to reevaluate some of these things.
well, it's like the analogy in healthcare. People become ill and they want someone else to fix them, and they want someone else to pay for it. So it's the same thing with this lady's thinking. She wants um, someone else to, pay for her inability right now to purchase what it is she wants because, she can't. So she wants it provided in some other way. And so this gets back to the point that I made earlier, is that the Marxist communist end of society, uh, they they very much want to see um, equal outcomes regardless of effort. And so, I guess if everybody lived in a 3-room shack, that would make that kind of person happy. You know, yeah, humanity isn't built this way. Humanity is built. I mean, we are individuals to begin with, and we all have our own talents. If you've seen me, you know that one of my talents would never be a professional basketball player, for example. And so we all have our own native abilities, and for society to function well, everybody needs to do something to their level of ability. Now, that is not to say that we ignore people who are born compromised, um, or who become compromised by life circumstances. Those people definitely need to be looked after. So this is where you have to have social programs that will look after these kinds of individuals, and in a way in which they have dignity and a quality of life as best possible. But for everybody else, you know, we wouldn't have evolved this way as a society if everybody was compelled the same way. you know, and because human ingenuity and creativity is individual, it's not collective. Okay. Now, you can get bright people together that can synergize their minds and their efforts, um, and and skills to create, but those traits are individualistic, you know, and you can get a bunch of people with the same skills working together to build a bridge. But guess what? You've got engineers, you got architects, you've got cement guys, you got steel guys, you got, you know, people that understand the subsoil and that sort of thing. They're all working together, but they have different skills, right? Different interests. Collectivism doesn't allow that. It pigeonholes everybody, and it makes you not want to do things, um, because you don't know what to do. All you're thinking about is surviving then, and you don't have the means to move on, and to be really productive and creative. If you think about it, everything that people do in society, to a very large extent, benefits society, right? I always like to take business as probably the number one most giving activity in society. Do you know why I say that? Because business provides a product or a service that the public needs, but it has to provide that product or a service at a competitive advantage to other companies that provide that same product or service. And if they don't provide it at a competitive advantage, they go out of business, right? This benefits the public because it keeps prices low. It's one of the essences of capitalism. As long as capitalism isn't controlled and you don't have monopolies or you don't have, companies getting together and price fixing. So this is where regulations become relevant, sort of thing. But I always think about business. People complain about business being greedy. I think business is the most giving thing out there. These are entrepreneurs that put their life and their economics on the line to create something that the public needs or wants or can use or will sustain the public. I don't get it why, the socialists, the Marxists complain about business as being greedy. Yeah, sure, some are, and some have been caught out. But,
Maybe that has to do more with the types of businesses that take advantage of the effects of a fiat currency and money printing. I feel
yeah,
like the criticisms, like everybody loves when you can get a good quality product at a cheap price and it's like easy to use, and
yeah,
they love all those benefits of capitalism. But I think the criticisms are misplaced at the mechanisms of capitalism. They're more concerned about, like, well, what enables what enables corruption of companies, of corporations, and that would be taking advantage of their they are benefiting from the effects of inflation through assets, through um pretty much they are getting wealthier because our currency is being devalued, and their wealth is increasing because of the assets they hold, rather than the money that, like, if somebody's poor, they don't have a lot of store value. And so their $1,000 is only worth $900 the next year, if you're into that
yeah.
into that
Oh, yeah.
state of inflation. So um these things distort what people can act like. It's harder to navigate um and make good decisions, so you're left being more dependent on a government when price signals are distorted,
Yes.
when you can't afford things. So these are solutions ultimately enabled by governments, which can only be solved by more government. In these terms, like, it begs for a government solution, and I feel like it's very compelling for a lot of these people, and it takes a lot of discussions to undo some of these ideas.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad we're
Well,
glad we're unpacking this.
you really hit the nail on the head on this one. I mean, if you were to look at, one of the biggest economic problems that we have, it's probably central bank control, and the way the whole banking system operates, and the way inflation has been created as a consequence of printing trillions and trillions of dollars of different currencies around the world. Um, and yeah, so we we've all seen it. Inflation has eroded our purchasing power dramatically. Um, but that then, brings us back to Alberta sovereignty. So, and think about currency for a moment. So you'll remember when the U.S. dollar was backed by gold, right? That was when the U.S. currency was
Not personally, but yes.
yeah, well, yeah, likewise. Uh, I was alive then, but I wasn't thinking about currency at that time. Um, but if you think about it from the perspective of the U.S. dollar backed by gold, it was the strongest currency in the world, and it's losing ever since Nixon removed the currency from the gold standard, it's been losing its strength over time. But it's been able to sort of maintain it because the U.S. has been so tremendously productive. Right now, it has a $30 trillion GDP. Um, and you take the other four largest countries in the world, and their GDP is 32 trillion. I just saw that the other day.
Hmm.
So what I'm getting at here is imagine Alberta as a sovereign country. Okay, and we move from a Canadian currency on an interim basis, to a U.S. currency, with the intention over time to develop our own currency backed by our natural resources, which is massive. Um, and it has the potential, and economists and bankers have told us the same thing, who have contributed to the value of Freedom Document, that an Alberta currency, which could be an Alberta, Saskatchewan, Central BC, Yukon, Northwest Territory, Nunavut currency, as it were, um, could become the strongest currency of the world if it was actually backed by something that doesn't change materially. Like the price of gold goes up, right? So that would have strengthened the U.S. dollar even more. So,
But the same amount of gold, like
yeah,
a house, you could buy a house for a certain amount of gold 100 years ago,
yeah,
and it's roughly a similar amount of gold now. So there is some persistence over time of
yeah.
the value of that.
But you're thinking about like something like a petrodollar kind of thing.
Well, no, not just a petrodollar. I mean, we could back the an Alberta currency by oil, by coal.
Mm.
We have some of the best and massive amounts of coking coal in the world.
Mm.
We could back it by forestry, other minerals, water, agriculture. I mean, there are all sorts of things that could back it. And these commodities do change in value. There's no question about it. But in general, they gradually go up rather than down. So
Mm.
so it helps um, keep control of inflation. In essence, it actually stops it to a very large extent, and inflation can then only grow at the rate that all of these commodities together grow in value, right? But
Yeah.
then everybody else is benefiting anyhow, so you don't lose your purchasing power. So I think people have asked us about Alberta becoming a sovereign country and about developing our own currency. And I think it's something that should be done, but it's a step that we'd have to take. Could we go from a Canadian currency right to an Alberta currency? I'm not sure about that. Um, we've sort of worked out the numbers and believe that from our discussions with the U.S. administration, or at least our preliminary discussions, we'd be looking at moving to a U.S. currency, because oil and gas is traded in U.S. dollars right now anyhow, right? So
Mm.
So we'd move in that direction, and then from there see how things go, and then make a decision about moving to another currency. And something very interesting to think about that. What if Alberta, Saskatchewan, and some other regions in the West became a sovereign country, and we developed our own currency, going from a U.S. currency to our own currency? Maybe the U.S. would want to do the same thing, and go back to backing their currency with something, you know, um, like gold. So who knows? I
Would
don't know.
certainly be in
So
their
many
best
things to do.
interest, I think.
Well, it's just it's I mean, intellectually, it's worthwhile thinking about these things because they're possible, but you need to go through the analysis as to the wisdom of doing these things. Okay, so the value of freedom document, there's a lot of wisdom in that because there's been a lot of thinking about um, how to, what would happen economically to Alberta going from a province to becoming a sovereign country. And that wisdom comes from a lot of very bright uh, people, like I said, economists, accountants, actuaries, professionals, business people.
Well, Dr. Modry, we've had you for about an hour now, so we want to respect your time, but I want to maybe end on one question. When we saw you a few weeks ago at the APP town hall, we asked you about your general feeling about the state of what the likelihood of a successful referendum is, and you were feeling fairly confident based on polling metrics related to the similar referendum a few years ago on equalization. Has anything changed in the last few weeks? Are you still feeling positive about it? Has the wind shifted at all, or are we still? Do you believe we're still on track for a successful referendum?
Yeah, no, I do believe that we're on track for a successful referendum. I don't think that Mr. Carney is going to be able to offer or is able to offer Alberta anything near what Albertans want, nor will he be able to offer anything near what the Premier has asked for or the Alberta Next panel has put forward. And so, under those circumstances, I think we're just moving closer and closer um, to uh, achieving the result that we're after, which is a successful referendum. And to be honest, and we talked about this at that APP meeting, is polling really accurate? And there have been some recent articles that have come out that suggest that people are not responding to certain questions. For
Mm.
example, questions on sovereignty. And like I said at the APP meeting, um, you know, who predicted the outcome of the U.S. election? The polling certainly didn't. Neither did the exit polling. It was only when the votes were counted that the U.S. public really understood what had happened, and that is the public recognized something dramatic needed to happen to change the direction of the United States. Well, I think exactly the same thing is happening in Alberta. And regardless of what the polling shows, I think we're closer to a plurality, or we already have a plurality. And we will only know that when we have the definitive referendum.
And what are the effects of another 6 months? Like a polling, it's skewed, but it's also just a
Mhm.
sample in time.
Well, I
And
think,
if you look at the momentum,
yeah.
we're having more and more conversations.
Well, James, that's a really good question. What's going to happen in the next few months? Well, there's going to be a lot more education out there. There's going to be a lot more people that are engaged in the discussion on Alberta sovereignty, and it's going to occur as a consequence of Mr. Lukasik's question, which has stimulated more discussion. There's going to be more discussion, when our question is approved or modified, and we go ahead, and then we're actually into an actual petition, um, and and I think the timing actually assists us. So we already have exceeded the threshold for the uh, to achieve a successful petition to obligate the provincial government. We just need the approval to proceed to collect the signatures, the 177,000 that we need, and and then we're off to the races. And there's going to be so much media coverage on this from local media, national media, and international media. It's going to be quite the spectacle.
Well, I hope that we can have you back on to discuss all the things that you and the APP and maybe us by extension did to further the successful referendum. So, Dr. Modry, thank you so much for your time, sir. We really appreciate this. Do you have any links you want to share? You want us to put in the notes where people can find you specifically?
Well, I don't. I don't know. I've given hundreds of presentations and podcast interviews, et cetera, et cetera. No, my suggestion would be for people that want to learn more about the rationale and merits of Alberta sovereignty, go to our website, albertaprosperityproject.com. There's a lot of really good information there. And, what is of value to understand is that there isn't anything that we have on the website that hasn't been vetted and checked, for which there is evidential support for everything that we've said. So, and this is one of the reasons why I might say the other side doesn't want to debate us, because they can't. They can't use any evidence to support what they're saying, in opposition to what we have already outlined. So, but in any
Excellent.
case, I hope at some point we have an opportunity to debate individuals that feel differently, and we welcome that opportunity.
That's the sign of a strong position, and we appreciate that. So, thank you again, sir, and
Yeah.
we'll hopefully see you at an event here soon.
Very good. All right.
Cheers.
Thanks a
for
lot.
coming.